Hey guys, welcome to ScareTheater, and today I'm going to be talking about The Zodiac Killer, which was requested by Riley Henderson. So without further ado, here is the Zodiac Killer video. Murder seems to be one of the most difficult crimes to get away with, especially because of how advanced technology has become. Committing one murder would be hard enough to get away with, and it would be nearly impossible to get away with committing several murders. Infamous serial killers such as Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer are proof of how unlikely it is for a serial killer to get away with his or her crimes. So it is definitely a surprise to hear that someone who killed at least 7 people during the 60s and 70s was never caught. He calls himself the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer infamous for terrorizing California in the late 60s and early 70s. He actually gave himself the name Zodiac, but no one really knows why. For most of his victims, he would use a gun, but occasionally he would use a knife. The people he seemed to target the most were young couples. He would even dress up in a strange costume sometimes when committing the murders. Sometimes, at crime scenes, he would leave behind a cross-circle symbol, but no one really understood the meaning of it. One thing that was unique about the Zodiac was how he would call the police after he killed someone to take credit for it, and would even send in letters to the newspaper. At one point, the Zodiac sent in 4 cryptograms to the newspaper, in which he said included his name. Of the 4 cryptograms, only one was solved, and it read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill someone gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name, because you will try to slow down or stop my collection of slaves for my afterlife." The Zodiac stopped killing people in the early 70s, and to this day he was never caught. The Zodiac Killer actually inspired a movie called Zodiac, but the movie is only about 35% accurate to the events that actually happened. The Zodiac claimed that he had 37 victims, but there are only 7 people that they definitely know that he killed. His first definite victims were David Faraday, who was 17 years old, and Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16 years old. The victims were approached by the Zodiac while in David Faraday's station wagon, and shots were fired into the vehicle. Betty Lou Jensen fled from the vehicle, followed by Faraday. Faraday was shot once in the back of the head, and Jensen was shot 5 times in the back. There was no sign of molestation or robbery, and there were no witnesses. It was months later that the Zodiac actually called the police to take credit for the murders. They knew he was telling the truth because he provided information that was not known to the general public. Darlene Ferrin, who was 18 years old, and Mike Maggia, who was 16 years old, were his next 2 victims. In this case, Mike Maggia actually survived the attack. Ferrin and Maggia were parked in an isolated location when a car pulled up, and a man with a flashlight exited. Without warning, the man fired 5 shots at the couple, and then walked back to his car. Maggia screamed in pain, and the man came back and fired 2 more shots into each person. That was when Maggia caught a glimpse of him. He was 5'8" to 5'9", late 20s to early 30s, stocky build, round face, and had brown hair. 45 minutes later, the Zodiac called the police and took credit for the attack. In 1991, Maggia actually identified Arthur Lee Allen, one of the top suspects of the Zodiac, to be the killer. When he was asked why he didn't identify him in the 20 years that he was a top suspect, Maggia said that he was never given a picture of any of the suspects, and he was only asked if he recognized any names. The police weren't too smart, as you can tell. His next 2 victims were Cecilia Shepard, who was 22 years old, and Brian Hartnell, who was 20 years old. Once again, in this attack, Brian Hartnell survived. Shepard and Hartnell were on the beach when a man, who Hartnell said was 6 feet tall with a heavy build and wearing a strange costume, approached them and tied them up. Afterwards, he began stabbing them and then left. Hartnell survived, but Shepard was not as fortunate. An hour after the attack, the Zodiac called the police and took responsibility for their attack as well. At the crime scene, written on the victim's car, were the dates of the Faraday-Jensen attack and the Theron-Magial attack, as well as a cross-circle symbol. There were also size 10.5 wing shoe prints recovered from the scene, which indicated an attacker who was more than 210 pounds. The Zodiac's final definite victim was Paul Stine, who was a 29-year-old cab driver. He was shot in the head at point-blank range, and a portion of his shirt was carefully torn off. There were 3 witnesses that watched this happen from 60 feet away. They called the police and described the killer as a white male, 25 to 30 years old, 5'8" to 5'9", stocky build, reddish-brown hair, and heavy-rimmed glasses. The dispatcher mistakenly described the suspect as a black male, so when the patrol officer saw a white male who fit the description, they never stopped to question him. 2 days later, the police received a letter from the Zodiac containing the torn-off portion of the victim's shirt, and him taking credit for the murder. The 3 witnesses worked together with the police to make a sketch for the Zodiac. Then, in early 2004, the case was closed, despite the fact that they never caught the Zodiac. So that's enough information about the Zodiac's killings. The real question here is, who was the Zodiac? First, let's take a look at what we know about him from the police reports. Both Mike Magial and the 3 people that witnessed the killing of Paul Stine said that the killer was 5'8" to 5'9", late 20s to early 30s, stocky build, and had brownish hair. So we know that all of those attributes were probably true. It is also largely agreed that he wore glasses, according to the sketch. At one point, the top suspected person to be the Zodiac was Arthur Lee Allen, but I'm not so sure that it was actually him. Whereas he does have a stocky build, he does not wear glasses, and he's bald. I think it's much more likely that the man named Richard Kowski, who died in 2004 from cancer, was the Zodiac. The website called ZodiacKiller.com was contacted by someone who goes by the name of Goldcatcher, who met Richard Kowski in 1969 and grew to suspect him of being the Zodiac. Kowski was briefly investigated in 1986, but later the investigation was dropped. Most of the information I'm about to present to you was not known by the investigators at the time. Kowski served in the military in the 1950s and was trained as a medic. The medics were trained to tear the clothing off a bleeding victim. Coincidentally, the Zodiac tore a piece of clothing off Paul Stine shortly after he killed him. Darlene Ferrin, who would eventually become one of the Zodiac's victims, moved to Albany, New York with her husband. Richard Kowski followed her, moving across the country from Martinez, California, and ended up working in the same building as her husband. In addition, Kowski was a member of a newspaper called Good Times, which published violent works of fiction that were nearly a blueprint for the Zodiac's future crimes. It's also pretty compelling that at the time of Paul Stine's murder, the Good Times newspaper made a reference to Switchboard, which was located only yards away from Stine's home. Even weirder is that Kowski attended Stine's funeral, despite not even knowing him. It's also notable that Kowski would often shorten his last name with various 4-letter spellings, such as Geik, G-I-K-E, and Gaik, G-A-I-K. Interestingly, Gaik, G-Y-K-E, can be seen in the Zodiac's 3-part cipher. Also, the way that the Zodiac chose to code the cipher will phonetically give you Kowski's full last name. But perhaps the strongest evidence for Kowski being the Zodiac is that on March 13th, 1971, the Zodiac sent a letter to Los Angeles Times. Soon after this, Kowski was involuntarily committed to the Napa State Hospital, diagnosed with a mental illness, and treated at Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco. The Zodiac didn't write again for nearly 3 years. These are just some of the many pieces of evidence that you can look at on ZodiacKiller.com that indicate that Richard Kowski could definitely be the Zodiac. The Zodiac is one of the few serial killers to actually get away with his crimes, and although some of it can be attributed to his intelligence, there were also a few huge mistakes that the police made that helped the Zodiac avoid getting caught. Despite how much evidence we have for whoever might have been the Zodiac, we'll most likely never know, especially because he's probably dead by now. Thank you for watching, everyone, and I will see you on the flip side.